Yeah,
absolutely.
So, thank you everyone for joining. Many of you have already heard me introduce this for the last 5 or 6 weeks. Thank you for joining us today. The Speakers Agency has been going since 2001, and we've seen tough times in the past and we're seeing them again, and that's why we're holding these virtual meetings, so that speakers can showcase themselves and show you that virtual speaking is just as good as being live. And Q&A works really well, which you'll experience at the end of this. We supply speakers in all genres. We supply panel moderators, we supply facilitators, awards hosts, the whole shebang. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Katie and then I'll speak again at the end of this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here again and getting access each week to some absolutely incredible speakers, and this week is certainly no exception. And what an important and topical subject we have to debate today as well. And each week we certainly have a really healthy Q&A, so looking forward to that. Excuse me. So I'm going to kick off by introducing our first speaker, who is Baroness Helen Newlove. She's a respected campaigner, author of Could It Happen to You?, a parliamentary peer and deputy speaker in the House of Lords. And she's going to talk to us about how her life fell apart in August 2007 when her husband Garry was fatally attacked by a gang of teenage yobs on the family's doorstep. So over to you, Helen, to kick off today. Thank you.
Hello everybody, this is really, I love these webinars, I get to meet so many people. I'm the warm-up act for Michael and Paul. So we've only got 7 minutes, so I'll try and do my best in 7 minutes because I can talk for England, never mind that. But thank you for coming on, and thank you for the introduction, Katie, in a sense of actually kind of give a brief outlook of what's gone on in my life over the last 10 years. And so yes, I'm an ordinary woman like everybody else with children. I wasn't Mother Teresa and Garry wasn't the Pope, but sadly, one evening, August the 10th, Garry went out and was kicked and punched to death by a gang of youths. Every kick and punch was witnessed by my 3 young daughters, Zoe, Danielle and Amy, and they had to do CPR on their dad. They had to pull his tongue out because he was bleeding, choking on his blood, and it was just something that you see in a film or on an Xbox or something like that, and it was like, this can't be happening to us. So from August the 10th, our lives, my 3 daughters and I, have completely changed from who we are. And for me, I do the job I do and the work I do is for my 3 daughters in a sense, because they're my heroines. Because what they saw on the night, I can't even talk about to anybody in a sense of, as a mother, I can't do because of the pain as I feel, as a guilt as a mother, that I can't wrap around cotton wool to take that pain away. But it was something that was national, it hit the headlines because at that time there was a lot of youth, alcohol issues, drug issues. And I think it's really, today is really ironic in the crime issues that we're going through today. We're having a lot of other violent issues, historical issues. It's amazing how we're still discussing antisocial behaviour, but the level of violence with antisocial behaviour has escalated. You know, August the 10th, he went into hospital that night. On August the 12th, I had to turn his life support machine off because his brain was dangling just like a piece of string. And I don't say it to make the mood go down, but that's the reality of violence and the reality that families go through. And I had no vision whatsoever. Cheshire Police were wonderful. And the next few weeks, months, where everybody was coming through, it was all a blur. My daughters had to give evidence, witness parades, everything, you name it, they went through it and never complained. But we were in a robotic motion. We then had the court trial, which was 10 weeks. And as somebody who's worked in a courtroom background, I have to say being a victim and a family going through something is completely different. And I've got huge respect for courts. I wanted to be a barrister. So I've really got huge respect, but it opened your eyes to actually what there isn't there for victims. And after 10 weeks of going through hell with my daughters giving evidence, I couldn't give them a hug, couldn't give them any kind of assistance, support to say you'd be fine. And even though they were grieving, Zoe, who was my eldest, had to give evidence in court. And she was cross-examined, well, they all were by 5 QCs. And she's really scared because you're a piece of evidence, and Garry was man A on a map, and they showed that map where the defendants, they were saying where they were on the map around Garry. And it was only when they accused Garry of being bolshy and arguing with them that I could have high-fived my daughter, because she said, "What do you mean like you are, or you 5QC?" And I could have high-fived her and done contempt of court, really, because I just thought it was brilliant. Somebody who was so nervous. But it has never left her. She mentions the map all the time. And you've just got no control. You're waiting for a system that actually tells you how you can emotionally control yourself. We couldn't cry, we couldn't fidget, we have to do this, we have to do that, complete opposite. And it was only when I made my statement after the sentence and conviction, which I've never done in my life. I've done statements as a legal PA, I've done all that, but never written one about how we felt. But it was the opportunity to speak about Garry as a person, as a father. And from there, our life completely changed again. But while all that's going on, people think it's all great because you see it in a story and you think it ends. It doesn't end. In fact, it ends when the court trial, that bit ends for that. But the life of what victims go through and we have as a family, and still as I sit here today, going through the criminal justice process is unbelievable. How we're perceived as victims, that we're vigilantes, we're very emotional. And quite rightly we are. But after making my statement, I did it for Garry and for my 3 daughters to watch. And that's all I thought it would be. And I answered a question on Sky News the following day. There was an American in gangs, and he said he was fed up of going to funerals of gangs. And if you've got any questions, email him. Well, I did. The communications officer at Cheshire Police phoned me and said, "What have you done?" Because I became breaking news. And I said, "I've just answered a question because I'm fed up of all of this." And then it kind of, everything escalated. I was very honoured to be able to make documentaries because I wanted to find out how we could make this better for young people, get them off alcohol, get them off drugs, get them into education, let them do something. So I went to prisons, I went into hard estates, and I'm a northerner, I'm a gobby northerner and a tough northerner. But I was actually, before I lost Garry, I was very quiet, believe it or not, which now my friends just laugh. And my uncle calls me a mouse that now roars. But when you get put in a position that you now become the main breadwinner, I had to still look after my girls. I had to then, look at where we live because it was outside our family home. Everything's coming at you, and you have to change. Either it breaks you or it makes you get up and do something for the good. And that's what I did for my daughters. Not that I wasn't suicidal. There was a nice bottle of pills that kept looking at me, and that wasn't, but it wasn't fair to do that to my daughters. And then I even got, I wanted to do something, but I didn't know, and I was just a normal person. But then I got an email from David Cameron, who I reported to the police because I said, somebody's pretending to be David Cameron. And at the time he was in opposition. And I said to Cheshire Police, you need to sort this out, this is not very good. And they came back and said, actually, it is David Cameron. And so I emailed him and everything, and he never answered me. So I emailed him back and said, you're just as bad as all the others. You're all window dressers. You're not interested, but you ain't going to use me. And he came straight back and he said, I do apologise. I've just got on an internet for you to say I'm on holiday in South Africa. So I let him off. But that's the relationship we had, David Cameron and I, because I've got no hidden agenda. I'm a working class mum. I've been brought up with morals and manners and respect, but I'm not going to be used for political basis. But we did build a relationship up. And then we wanted to do something positive. We set up New Love FM in our local Warrington area. I actually got David Cameron and Gordon Brown on there. We interviewed him on our radio project. So that was quite nice. Met Gordon Brown with the girls, and Amy was in awe because he asked her a question. And then she started to cry, and I thought, oh, this is terrible. And she said, no, that's the Prime Minister, mother. That's the Prime Minister of the country. She was absolutely in awe of who she was talking to. So it's been kind of a whirlwind, but people just see what you see on the front. It has been a challenge in what I've had to do, because I've had to become that provider. you know, we had to move home because the jury came down the road to see where Garry lay. We had lots of press intrusion. People tried to get in the back gardens. The police had to put a desist notice. And in fact, one journalist found Garry's best friend. You know, it was a kind of a blur of things and something that I've never been used to. So I had to take a deep breath. I had to change who I was, but I had no vision, and I was just respectful of what I wanted to do. After going through that blur, going out there, looking at campaigning about young people, speaking to young people, I got a telephone call off David Cameron, and would I like a seat in the House of Lords? Well, I've never, you know, that's not my world. I've read them in about a book, but, you know, I'm thinking, oh, and you can't tell anybody. It's very secret, hush, hush, which is even worse to say. It's like telling somebody not to do something, do the opposite. But I did tell my mum, because she's very royalist and historian. And but then the general election came around, so we had to wait 8 months. And I knew I'd got a place because you're scrutinised and they go into your background, and I was panicking in case I hadn't paid my lecky bill or my gas bill, you know, would they be telling me? And when I spoke to the leader of the House of Lords, he said, no, it's if you're a donor to the Conservative Party, you know, if you've got millions. And I just, look, I've got 3 daughters, they love the shoes and the makeup, do you think I'd be giving millions to you? So I didn't sweat so much there, but I found out I got it through Sky News because it's on the ticker tape. So they knew before me. So I've had a hilarious journey in a sense. But the essence of everything I do is that Garry would never be a statistic. We lose people and we're human beings, and they were loved and they were cherished. And Garry went out to ask a simple question: who's damaged my wife's car? And he ended up being kicked and punched by asking a simple question, protecting our neighbours. So that is the essence of what I do. And I know I'm on 7 minutes, but for me, it's this, you know, it's, if you want to change something, don't sit in an armchair, get up and do something. And I've, you know, when I went to the House of Lords, I thought I was Hilda Ogden, which there might be old people on here, only younger, you know, with the rollers. I thought I wasn't, you know, I don't speak posh. But it's the most respectful place. And the House of Lords gets a lot of bad press, and there's bad apples everywhere. And I won't go off on a tantrum. But, you know, I do 14-hour days there. We put a lot of work in, and I'm really respectful of my colleagues who constitutionally, history is in the chamber, and we follow it, not because we're pompous, because that's the rules of the House of Lords. And I love it, absolutely love history and learning. So my journey has been really up and down, but the most important role I've had is Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, meeting hundreds of victims, but, you know, over 7 years. I can never forget them. The most brutality, domestic abuse cases, child sexual abuse cases, antisocial behaviour. They feel alone. They don't feel their voice is heard. You know, that is what's important in what I do. And that's the person I really will challenge. And now having the opportunity at the end of being a Victims Commissioner, of going to the United Nations and speaking about victims and working on a piece of policy for victims globally opened my eyes. But more importantly, you know, I'm just like you guys. My mantra is Eleanor Roosevelt, is women are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until you pour them in hot water. So I'm going to shut up now because it puts it all together. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm honoured to be in front of you, and I'm honoured that you're listening. And that's my warm-up session for you guys. It's all right.
Absolutely not a warm-up, Helen. That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well done.
I think we're so lucky at the moment, and you know, big shout out to Sylvia for putting this on every week, because, you know, during lockdown we're coming into people like Helen's home, into her living room, and hearing a really honest, down to earth, really personal and powerful story. And I think that's really special. And I've taken away some great bits there, but your point there about not being a statistic, particularly at the moment, you know, with so many deaths from COVID, I think that's so powerful. And man or woman, you know, to have, you know, when, as you say, when you're thrown into that hot water, you know, how it makes or breaks you. So thank you so much for a really powerful, refreshingly honest account, which we can all learn from and be inspired by. So thank you for that, Helen. Next up, we have Michael Fraser, a face many of you will be very familiar to lots of us. He's the UK's best known security expert, co-presenter of BBC's Beat the Burglar, but also the principal mentor in Channel 4's Going Straight, in high demand as a home security expert. And he's going to talk to us a bit, his helpful tips protecting your home, your personal belongings. So we're going to hear Michael's own personal journey now. So over to you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Michael Fraser. From the age of 4, I was put into care because my father was a very violent Jamaican. He had 4 children. We were all split up and put into care. And I grew up in care from the age of 4 up till 18. In the time I was in care, which is late 60s, early 70s, it was a case of survival. If you didn't survive, you were bullied, physically attacked. You had to grow up defending yourself. So that's what I had to do. In children's homes, you tend to get a group of lads and girls as well sticking together. You had to be a part of them. It was peer pressure, not an excuse, but you had to be a part of them. And the group I joined went out and committed burglaries. We never attacked or assaulted anyone. It wasn't known then, but we would break into schools, homes, cars, anything like that. And I did this as part of the group. We got caught a couple of times, but because you're in care, you have what's like a protection order. So it's an excuse to, protect you really. At the age of 17, I actually got done for receiving stolen goods. And my social worker said to me, "You're on your way to prison." And that absolutely terrified me. It doesn't with a lot of people, but with me it did. Because at 17, even though I'd grown up in institutions and assessment centres, I really felt going into prison would have been the end of me. So I decided to go out and get a job. Whatever job I could get. I'm dyslexic, not very good at anything, but I went for a job at a factory as a labourer, and I'll never forget the guy who was the manager there. He interviewed me at 9 o'clock, and he said, "By the end of the day, I'll let you know. I've got other interviews to do." And I said, "Fair enough." I went back at 9:30. I said, "Have you thought about it?" He said, "Look, come back later. I'll let you know later. Don't worry." 10 o'clock, I went back. 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I was so persistent. And I know why I was persistent. I wanted the job. And the reason I wanted the job, I didn't want to go to prison. I was due in court and I was scared of going to prison. He gave me the job because of my persistence. And what he did was eventually put me on a machine, which was quite boring and monotonous. It was just cutting locks out. And I used to set myself targets. Okay, today I'm going to do 20, tomorrow 30, 40, and that's how I was. He would encourage me by saying, "I bet you can't do 50, so I'd do 60. Now, all through this, he was earning the money. He was paying me 60 pence per frame. Because I went self-employed, paying me 60 pence a frame. And then I asked him for the keys for the premises because I wanted to go in Saturday. I'm an early bird. I wanted to go in at 4 o'clock in the morning, work till 10 o'clock at night. And he gave me the keys. Massive trust. I had the keys. I used to go in and I would turn out 100 frames a day. One day I asked him if he could put the money up from 60 pence, just a little bit more. He said he couldn't afford to. And I was actually delivering these frames. I was taking phone calls in his office because people would phone up odd times. Oh, can you get this done? Can you get that done? And one of his customers actually called me in and he said, look, I'll pay you to make these frames. I can't give you no more than £6.80 per frame. Now, I'm no accountant, but I realised I was getting a hell of a lot more by doing them for him. So I set up a company, started it off, work all the hours you could do. People would phone up and they would order 20 frames. And I would say, yes, you can have them in 3 days' time. Then I'd get great pleasure in doing them in 24 hours, delivering them, getting the price for it. And eventually, by the time I was 21, I was a millionaire. I was employing 100 people. I made a policy that 25% of the staff would be ex-offenders. Not because I'm a do-gooder. My idea is that a lot of people who got involved in crime, especially in my time, wanted to get out of it, would do anything to get out of it, and they tended to work harder. Now, if you failed working for me, you were out the door. It wasn't, oh, you know, it's a shame. It's either work or go. I then got involved in TV because it was quite a good story. You know, guy comes from a mixed marriage, got nothing, set up, he's done okay. And I would do TV programs on what I believe is right and what we should do. I then got invited to be on a charity called the Apex Trust, which helps ex-offenders go straight. And then I got involved doing TV programs about home security, how you can secure yourself, factories, anything, the gadget show. I was doing all these different programs, which was great, and I loved it. It changed my life in the sense of, yes, people look at me, I'm an ex-burglar, but I do my utmost now to try and help people be more secure with what they've got and giving out tips of what you should and shouldn't do. And it's simple things, you know, they'll film me walking up to a front door and they'll say, right, tell us about this. Is this secure? I'll look at the door, one lock on it, which is normally a cylinder lock, and you'd say, no security. Even if you've got a deadlock, which is another lock on the door, what the burglar would do is push his foot up against the door. And if it moves more than 2 mil, you know that second lock isn't engaged. So I'd point out these sort of things, a cage on the inside of your letterbox, so people can't post through and pick up keys or bags from the inside. And it's basically just giving people advice on how to secure what they've got. The biggest mistake people make is things like leaving a calendar in the kitchen, facing the back window, giving the dates they're out, thinking all burglars can't read. So it's little things like that that I would point out and say, look, this is what you should be doing. This is what you shouldn't be doing. And it's giving advice, really. I enjoy it. I've been with Sylvia 20 odd years now, and she has been really good, pushes me on everything. And I enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. I still do it a lot. It's more about trying to give people advice and helping, and I still do. I'll talk to offenders, go into prisons, and, you know, it's funny listening to Dame Newlove saying she goes into there. I go in, I talk to them. I've got no sort of sympathy. It's more about, look, if you want to change your life, you've got to want to change it. I don't believe in sympathy because my background was my mother was a prostitute, my father was a drunk. He got killed in a car crash. She disappeared, and I was in at home all through that. And people used to say, God, what a sad life. And I used to think, God, it is sad. I'm sad. I've got a right to be a crook or a thief because it's sad. I've had a bad life, but it's not. It's what you do, what you can do to change it, and be genuine about changing it. Anybody, as far as I'm concerned, can create some form of success if they want to do it. That basically is me in a nutshell. I think I've done 8 minutes, so I'll pass you back to Kate.
Oh, well done, Michael.
Well done,
That was
mate.
amazing. Scary, shocking, amazing. Wow, millionaire at 21, in awe, but what a great role model. And I'm just going to speak for a few minutes, but you know, I grew up in a neighborhood in Tottenham in North London, and you know, many of my peers, my friends at school, were in a very similar boat to Michael and the stories that they had. I was on the receiving end of a lot of crime, lots of burglaries, growing up on the 11th floor of a block of flats in Tottenham, and then other places we lived regularly burgled, arms coming through while my lock was on in the middle of the night, but never actually strangling me. A very close scrape with the infamous Tottenham rapist in the late 1980s as well. My story is different. I mean, I really got to 50 3 years ago and had to take a similar kind of courage to take a leap into a whole new world. And I think, you know, both Baroness Helen and Michael talked about, you know, whatever your background, wherever you've come from, it's that fire in your belly, it's that something that drives you, that hunger. And I was feeling overlooked. I was feeling as if I had failed to sell my business. I was twice the age of everyone. I no longer had the USP of being a digital marketing expert. Every man and his wife was one of those. I was no longer in London. I was in a little known town in Kent. And I had to go away and reinvent myself. And I wrote this book on the impact of artificial intelligence, and it's changed everything. You know, doors have opened. I'm on an all-party parliamentary group at the House of Lords, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, because the role that new technology is playing in crime is so important. So I'm not a technologist, but I've written a book and I've spent a lot of time immersing myself in how new technology can change you as an individual, change societies, change businesses. And I think this is more important than ever before, because yesterday IBM announced that it's pulling back from using technology like artificial intelligence in some of its police, some of its crime work. And I'm talking here of facial recognition. And we've got, obviously at the moment, and rightly so, a major emphasis on, you know, Black Lives Matter and all kinds of issues related to bias, racial prejudice, and the role that artificial intelligence and biometric technology has been playing and how it's been abused by some police forces all around the world is pretty shocking. So it was a big announcement yesterday by IBM about that, and, you know, thumbs up to them for doing that. Since the COVID pandemic started, there have been around about 1.8 million examples of financial crime using some of the technology that I'm talking about here. So you've got the bad side of how technology and cyber can all be abused by people, by cyber criminals. But at the same time, there's another side to it, which is the role that artificial intelligence can play in helping to identify cybercrime and fraud and protect people. So like everything, there's good and there's bad. And I'm working with lots of big corporates, regulators, MPs to come up, and the UK's really impressive at the moment and is leading the way on AI ethics for good. Other countries like America and China are ahead of us in the race for AI, but we're setting the stall as far as equality and ethics and transparency and privacy. And I'm really proud to, be part of some of that work, which has to keep going every day. It's coming into the fore every single day. So, huge thanks first to Helen and to Michael for sharing their personal stories. Mine is slightly different, but again, I'm 53, and I think all of us need to be on a journey of continuous learning. We need that humility, whether we've come from a working class background like, myself and Michael, wherever we've come from, wherever we live in the country, in the world, it's about, we're just people, we're human beings, and we need that heart and that honesty and that integrity. And that, for me, every day is what drives, what I'm trying to do. And I'm just launching a big project that's going live today, and there's going to be lots of press coverage about closing the skills gap with schools. And it's about giving young children in the schools I'm looking at, it's about diversity, racial diversity, hearing impairment, and it's giving them access to skills around AI, whatever their background and their pockets. So that's a little bit about me and my story. Next up, and our final speaker today, we have Paul Connolly. Same theme here again, running all the way through. And Paul is an investigative broadcast journalist and a TV and radio presenter based in London. Highly respected for his work on crime as well, undertaking daring undercover operations, infiltrating criminal gangs in cities and towns across Britain. So looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Paul. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to you all. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Sylvie. Well done, Michael, and Baroness as well. Big shoes to fill, but sure, I'll give it a whirl. So today I'm going to discuss my take on the mentality behind choosing dangerous professions. A little bit of further background as well. So as Katie says, I'm an investigative broadcast journalist, a documentary maker, producer, television and radio presenter. That's the CD out of the way. But in the world of television journalism, I suppose I'm known as someone who specializes, I have a bit of a niche, it's always a handy thing to have, in infiltrating criminal gangs, filming covertly whilst in their company, and then gathering sufficient evidence with which to confront them about their crimes. I also, for my sins, and much to the objections of my wife, do hostile environment work. So I've spent a lot of time living in some of the world's toughest prisons, as an inmate, voluntarily, I might add. I wasn't boozed up, then banged up abroad, as is the joke my friends so often like to extol. And recently, I spent some time working alongside the coolest man on the planet, an ex-FBI agent in Peru and Brazil, where we were attempting to solve the disappearance of 3 explorers. So I've had a lot of fun, been in quite a few dangerous situations as well. And the documentaries I've made have been on Netflix and Facebook Watch, Discovery Channel, BBC Worldwide, Channel 5, and all of that. Now, the reason why I go into that detail is not to puff up my chest. It is because whenever I'm sitting in a pub or I'm sat next to someone who recognizes me occasionally on a bus or I'm at a dinner party, of all the questions I'm asked about the jobs and the programs, the most common one is why? So why I do it, why I choose to put myself in dangerous situations for a living. And when that question is asked, almost every time I am instantly transported back to a specific moment in time that I'll tell you about. So I was working on a series called Undercover Criminal for Channel 5 here in the UK. And on one particular day, I was about to go undercover in a gang of criminals who run what's called a crash for cash insurance scam. Now, very briefly, the orchestrated crash between the two of them, 2 cars, bang, 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 and then they fleece the insurance company for every penny they can. So very nasty, unsavory sorts, you might agree. As I was about to leave the house, I caught myself taking off my wedding ring and leaving it in a bowl at the side of the bed. Now, mostly I do that every day. I do it so often. It's kind of an unconscious, almost involuntary movement. But that particular day, I wondered why I was doing it, and then realized for the very first time that I always did it on days when there was a chance that I'd be killed at work and wouldn't make it home. So I'm walking out the door with this on my mind, and I'm walking out the door thinking I might never see my wife again. So obviously very difficult things to try to wrap your head around, but you've got to put it to the back of your mind. Ultimately, you've got a job to do and a mortgage to pay. So we go undercover. It's myself and another bloke. During the actual operation itself, footage which made it into the documentary, the chap looks at me dead in the eyes and says, "You look a lot like a filmmaker." I cannot for the life of me place what his name is. Anyway, managed to talk myself out of that particular little pickle. We're in the car. I'm in the front seat, and everything goes to plan, albeit it isn't a plan you would very often like to find yourself involved in. The cars crash. It's about 35 miles an hour. Thankfully, the airbag doesn't go off. I'm unharmed. I confront them, and we get exactly what we need. But when I get home, I am amped up on adrenaline, to say the least. And I tell my wife what I was doing because I hadn't told her before I went out. For whatever reason, I just couldn't bring myself to tell her. Now, she was upset when I told her the truth, as you would be, but had been upset all day anyway because she knew that on days when I left my ring in the bowl, I didn't know she knew this. On days when I did that, she knew I might be coming home as well. And again, it was really difficult to swallow. It was a very difficult conversation to have. And I remember sitting there staring at her, wondering, why on God's earth am I doing this? What possible reason is there that I didn't choose marketing or accountancy or something infinitely safer? So since that day, because I'm a nosy, curious sort, I ask other people generally why they do this kind of work when I come across someone who does it, if they're in dangerous professions. And what I found was, and I thought it was really interesting, that a lot of people hadn't talked about this before, but they too had little rituals that they would perform almost involuntarily, almost subconsciously, on days when it was more likely than usual that death was going to come knocking on their door. An example I'll give you is from that chap I mentioned earlier on. So this is a fellow called Bobby Chacon. He's an ex-FBI undercover agent and profiler. And we're sitting in a jungle in Brazil, as you do, having a bit of dinner in the dark. And I ask him this question, Bobby, does this ring a bell to you? Do you have any rituals? He said, yeah. He said, I used to work undercover with this Jamaican gang in New York. And this was incredibly dangerous stuff. It was literally the wrong word, the wrong look. You say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time, and it is lights out. And for whatever reason, he said he carried Tic Tacs with him. And if he got into a situation where he thought, right, this is it, this is curtains, I'm about to go, lights out, he'd pop a Tic Tac, because when his wife came to identify the body, it didn't make sense, but it was his ritual. He didn't want his breath to be bad. And that's just an example. It's so odd, isn't it? But it's just an example of the rituals that people have. Now, when I get a chance to sit next to these types of people, I also tend to ask them why they do it, beyond the rituals, why they actually do it. Because at the same time, I'm asking myself these questions. The answers are many and varied, to say the least. Some, hated the work but needed the money. Fair enough. Some are adrenaline junkies. Some sincerely believe, and these are the people that I suppose are the purists, sincerely believe that the welfare of other people and the public in general is more important than their own safety. Those are the real heroes in my view. For some, it was vanity, if I'm honest. They were often scared in their day-to-day work, but liked being known as tough, as brave. So saw it as something of a worthwhile trade-off, a worthwhile exchange. And then others did it for respect or standing in the community and or the workplace. I suppose those two last points slightly tie in together. To give you one more brief example of a why moment that I had, and this followed the previous why moment, which was infiltrating the Crash for Cash gang. So I was in a hotel room in Paddington near the train station. And just to give you a little bit of a picture, it is myself and another undercover journalist. It is two very, very, very burly gentlemen. It is a very, 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 very small hotel room. And we had gotten them there under false pretenses. I call it constructive deceit when you were doing undercover work. But we had convinced them that we were legitimate buyers. They were selling counterfeit cash. They told us they had £1 million in counterfeit cash. They were going to sell us for 20 grand. So we basically get them into this hotel room. And, you know, generally before you do this kind of work, there are safety issues that you have to be cognizant of. One thing you should never do is be closest to the window when your two potential attackers, should something go wrong, have access to the door. But whatever worked out on the day, the mechanics, the nuts and bolts, the configuration of this particular situation, we were in the wrong spot. I was right next to the window of a 4th-story building, and these two lads were basically guarding the door. So here's what went wrong, and here's why I asked myself why. Now, when you're doing undercover work, you'd think that there's all sorts of fancy machinery involved. At the very elite levels, there is. When you're working for ITN and Channel 5, there isn't. So you were given pretty nifty undercover cameras, but you attach those undercover cameras with sticky tape, with Gorilla Tape. That's basically how you do it. And you've got to line the inside of your shirt with it. It is not very scientific. So on this particular day, and again, everything's a learning experience when you're doing this kind of stuff, this particular day is very, very, very hot. And I'm in the room, and we're giving it our spiel, and we're in character, and we're undercover, and everything is going well. They're believing us, they're liking us, the deal is nearly done. All of a sudden, I hear this very distinctive and loud ripping sound. Now, what in God's name is that, I think to myself. And I realize, because I can feel a weight pulling from my chest, I realize that my undercover camera is about to fall out. Now, I have about 4 to 5 seconds before that actually happens. And the world slowed down. And in my head, for those 4 to 5 seconds, I thought, all right, you're right next to a 4th-story window. There are 2 lads that won't think twice about chucking you out of said window if you don't think fast and you don't think clever. And whatever happens in those situations, I think fight, flight, or figure it out is the third F, to be honest. Because as it slipped, and it did slip, and it became exposed, and said burly men stopped dead in their tracks and looked at the camera as it slipped out. One of them said, roughly, "What the hell is that?" And I said, look, it's a colostomy bag. I had a bit of an issue there a while back, and I'm embarrassed about it. I don't like talking about it. Can we just move on? And they looked at each other, and probably the longest 4 to 5 seconds I have ever lived through followed that. And then one of them said, "Oh, mate, yeah, my mum has a similar thing. I'm sorry to hear that." We go on. We go on. We do the deal. And I walk out. Now, we get out of there pretty fast after that because we realized that that was really, really, really close. And the reason why I asked myself why was because I had found myself in a situation, didn't I? You know, in those 4 or 5 seconds, it could have been death. It really could have been. Some people say I'm being dramatic in that moment, but how do they know? And how do I know what might have happened, how they might have reacted? So I walked out of that room really questioning whether this is something that I wanted to do, and also questioning the effectiveness of the sticky tape that ITN and Channel 5 had purchased for this particular gig. So look, I'm about to wrap up, but in the end, I have settled on a few reasons why I do it, and I hope these make sense to you. I'll be honest, as Irish people tend to be, to my detriment, I definitely enjoy being called brave and courageous. My ego is delighted with himself anytime that crops up, which is amusing for everybody but me. But look, that's not enough. I also have a really strong, perhaps inflated, because it gets me in trouble sometimes, sense of injustice. So my instinct is to expose wrongdoing, and, you know, cheesy though it may sound, to help people who can't help themselves, or spot when they're being targeted. If someone doesn't know, if the wool is being pulled over someone's eyes, that really, really grinds my gears. And I suppose that's a huge part of why I'm involved in what I'm involved in today. But again, that's not quite enough either. Finally, I think I primarily do this work because my curiosity outweighs my fear. That's what I've decided upon. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, to be honest. I want to know how criminal operations work behind closed doors, when they don't know that someone is watching, when they don't know that someone is listening. I want to know what it's like to live in an extraordinarily dangerous prison as an inmate for real. I mean, I'm fascinated by the criminal mentality. You know, so whilst I'm very often scared, even terrified, I don't mind telling you that. I was terrified that night in that hotel room in Paddington, I'll tell you that. My curiosity seems to overpower that fear and pushes me on. I mean, I want to know these things. I want to know them desperately enough that I'm not prepared to hear them secondhand. So that's the only sense I can make of something that doesn't really make any sense to me, to be honest. As a result, I hope you agree, I have some half decent stories to tell. They get better after a few pints, I'll tell you that too. Stories that I suppose motivate people, stories of how hardships and obstacles are overcome, stories to which many parallels can be drawn to the corporate world as well, which I've found since I've signed up with Sylvia. And one last point that was unexpected, but I think is interesting, that years of undercover work have taught me a great deal about verbal and non-verbal communication. So skills that are very useful in life, but in my work life, they've helped me develop interview techniques, advanced presentation skills, crisis management skills, and plenty of other byproducts that I now use as part of media training courses and indeed talks like this. So terrifying situations, I have, I suppose, managed to transform and transfigure into things that might be useful. So look, I'm about to finish. In conclusion, I work in a dangerous profession because I think I have to. I think it's the only thing I could do that makes me happy, sad, as my wife says. That makes me happy enough, terrified at the same time, but I think it's the only thing I can do to be as happy as I am. And thankfully I am. And there are fringe benefits. And I think also the reason is because I'm too curious, AKA nosy, not to do it in the first place. That's me. Thanks very much for listening.
Well done, Paul. Good news that you're not undercover, because you've got, as in good Irish mode, great stories to tell. So,
I hope so. Thank you.
I love the sticky tape, and then I love, forgive the pun, but the seat of the pants
come
scenario
here.
there.
Come here. Oh, anytime I hear a rip, believe me, I'm out the door.
That's absolutely fantastic. And that constructive deceit, that's a clever little phrase. I might have to start using that. But
dude, if you're ever lying to anybody for gain,
yes,
for
constructive.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Well done. That was amazing. I love that.
Thank you, my friend.
So Helen, Michael, Paul, thank you all for that. We're going to break into 2 breakout rooms now. My colleague Ashley is going to drop you in. You won't need to do very much. Just follow the simple instruction that pops up on screen, and you'll join myself and Baroness Newlove in one, and Sylvia with Paul and Michael in the other, and then we'll switch. So you'll get an opportunity in smaller groups. It's nice for some people to actually get access to people. So see you in a couple of moments in the first breakout. Thank you.